I never thought much about the word home until I lost mine. Growing up, I thought home was a fixed point, like a pin on a map. My parents' narrow townhouse in the suburbs of Philadelphia, with its creaky stairs and smell of fresh laundry, was supposed to be it forever. But in my early 20s, that pin slipped off the map entirely. My parents sold the house, moved to Florida, and I was left blinking at my life like it was an empty apartment I'd just walked into. It's how I ended up in Portland, Oregon. IT wasn't the obvious choice. I didn't know anyone here, didn't have a job lined up, and most inconvenient of all, had no plan. But one night, scrolling through apartment listings on my cracked phone screen, I saw a studio with peeling white brick walls, a single wide window, and rent just low enough to make me think maybe. The next day, I wired the deposit without thinking it through. When I arrived that first week of April, the city was gray in a way I wasn't used to. The air smelled like wet cedar and coffee, buses rumbled over the damp streets, and strangers actually smiled at me on the sidewalk, which, coming from the East Coast, was alarming. The apartment looked exactly like it had in the photos, tiny, a little drafty, with pipes that made a soft ticking sound when the radiator heated up. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to share a wall with my parents' arguments or my older brother's terrible guitar practice. I could walk around in socks at midnight without anyone asking what I was doing. Still, the silence was heavier than I'd expected. The first week, I filled my days with the kind of errands you do when you're pretending you know what you're doing. Bought a cheap second-hand couch from Facebook Marketplace. It barely fit through the door. Found a grocery store where the cashier called me hon and told me which apples were on sale. Got lost twice trying to find the bus stop. At night, I'd sit by my window and watch the glow of the bar across the street. I could see people coming and going, laughing, their coats damp from the drizzle. I told myself I'd go in one day. Not yet, though. On the 10th day, I landed my first job interview. IT wasn't glamorous as barista at a coffee shop called the Hollow Bean, but it was within walking distance and paid just enough for me to cover rent and instant ramen. I wore my nicest sweater, straightened my hair, and showed up 15 minutes early. The manager, a tall woman with sharp cheekbones and a tattoo of a raven on her forearm, glanced at my resume and said, "You ever work in coffee before?" "No," I admitted. "But I learned fast." She looked at me for a long moment, then shrugged. "We'll see. Come in tomorrow at 8. Trial shift." That night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, rehearsing how I'd smile at customers, how I'd make small talk without sounding fake. I didn't know it then, but that job would change everything, not because I loved making lattes, but because of the people I'd meet behind that counter. The first person was Jules. She was 2 years older than me, with copper hair always twisted up in a messy knot and a nose ring that caught the light when she laughed. Jules had that kind of easy confidence I envied, like she'd been born knowing exactly who she was. "You're the new girl," she said on my first day, sliding a stack of mugs toward me. "I'm Jules. Don't worry, I'll teach you how not to burn the espresso." Over the next week, she showed me the ropes, how to steam milk without it screaming, how to memorize the regulars' orders, how to sneak bites of the blueberry muffins without getting caught. She also taught me the unspoken rules of the place. Always smile at the old man in the fedora, he tips in quarters, never correct the guy who mispronounces macchiato, and if the espresso machine hisses twice, it means it's about to spit boiling water at you. By the end of my first month in Portland, my life had a rhythm. Mornings were for coffee and conversation, afternoons for wandering the city, evenings for sitting by my window and watching the bar across the street. Sometimes Jules would drag me there after work. One Thursday, she leaned against the counter, chewing a pen cap. "You doing anything tonight?" I hesitated. "Not really." "Good. There's open mic night at the Rusty Anchor. You're coming." I started to protest, but she was already untangling her apron strings. "You can't live in Portland and not go to an open mic. It's, like, against the law." The Rusty Anchor was smaller than it looked from across the street, warm with the smell of beer and fried food. The stage was barely a step up from the floor, and a guy with long hair was tuning a guitar. Jules ordered us ciders and found a table near the front. "You're gonna love this," she said. Half the acts are amazing, and half are so bad they're amazing. She was right. The night was a blur of earnest poetry, shaky-voiced singers, and one guy who performed a dramatic reading from The Lord of the Rings for reasons I never figured out. But it was the last performer who caught my attention, walked up with a battered acoustic guitar and a quiet sort of presence, like he didn't care if anyone listened. His voice was low, steady, a little rough at the edges, and the song, whatever it was, felt like something you'd play while driving through an empty highway at night. When he finished, there was a heartbeat of silence before the applause. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath. Afterward, I spotted him by the bar, nursing a beer. I wasn't the kind of person who went up to strangers, but something about him pulled me forward. "Hey," I said, awkwardly tucking my hair behind my ear. "I liked your set." He glanced at me, then smiled, small but warm. "Thanks. I'm Evan." "Lena," I said. "Do you play here a lot?" "Sometimes. Mostly when I can't sleep." Jules appeared at my side, already half drunk. "You should have seen her, Evan. She's new in town, total Portland newbie. You should give her the tour." Evan chuckled. "Maybe I will." I didn't know then how much that moment would matter. How one conversation in a dim bar could ripple through my life in ways I couldn't imagine. By the time I walked home that night, the rain had stopped. The streets gleamed under the streetlights, and the air smelled like something was just beginning. I didn't know it yet, but it was. The morning after the open mic, I walked into the Hollow Bean with a dull ache behind my eyes. Not quite a hangover, but close enough to make me regret that third cider Jules insisted on ordering. She was already behind the counter, hair piled on top of her head like she'd wrestled it into submission. "Morning, rookie," she said, sliding a croissant onto a plate and handing it to me. "On the house. Perks of surviving your first rusty anchor night." I took a grateful bite. "Thanks. So, that guy last night. Evan. You know him?" "Sort of." Jules shrugged, pouring milk into a pitcher. "He's been around a while. Plays at the Anchor, sometimes busks downtown. Keeps to himself mostly. I think he works at a record store or something." I tried to sound casual. "He seemed nice." Jules gave me a knowing smirk. Just be careful, Lena. Nice is easy to fake." That stuck with me all day, even as I fumbled my way through cappuccino orders and tried not to scorch my hands on the steam wand. The truth was, I didn't know anything about Evan, not beyond that one song, that one beer, that one smile. But I wanted to. That night, sitting by my window, I caught myself looking for him across the street. Of course, he wasn't there. The bar was quieter on Sundays, and the idea of just showing up to find him felt desperate. Still, I couldn't shake the thought. 2 days later, he walked into the Hollow Bean. It was mid-morning, the lull between the commuter rush and the lunch crowd. I was wiping down the counter when the bell over the door chimed, and there he was, hood pulled up against the drizzle, guitar case slung over one shoulder. He smiled faintly when he saw me. "Hey. You work here?" I tried not to look like my brain had short-circuited. "Yeah. Coffee by day, music appreciator by night." He chuckled, stepping up to the counter. "Guess I owe you one, then. For listening the other night." "What'll it be?" I asked, picking up a marker. "Black coffee. Large." I wrote his name without asking, Evan, and passed the cup to Jules, who raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. When I slid his drink across the counter, he lingered instead of leaving. "You get a break soon?" I blinked. "In about 10 minutes. "Cool. I'll wait." We sat at a corner table, the air between us smelling faintly of coffee beans and rain. Evan wrapped his hands around his cup like he was stealing the heat. "So," he said, "what brings you to Portland?" The easy answer would have been a change of scenery. The real answer was Messier, a growing restlessness, a sudden move, a feeling I'd been treading water in a life that didn't fit me anymore. I went with the easier version, just wanted something different, I said. I didn't know anyone here, but I guess that was the point. He nodded like he understood. Sometimes you need to get lost to figure things out. There was something in the way he said it, like it wasn't just a metaphor for him. After that day, Evan became part of my routine in a way I didn't plan for. Sometimes he'd stop by the coffee shop between gigs, sometimes I'd catch him playing outside the bookstore on Hawthorne. Other times, we'd end up at the Rusty Anchor without planning it, like the city was small enough to keep tossing us into the same places. He wasn't loud or flashy, but he had this way of making conversations feel unhurried. Like we had all the time in the world. Which was strange, because I'd never been good at sitting still. It was a Thursday night in late May when he asked me to walk with him. Just finished a shift, my hair smelling faintly of espresso. He was leaning against the lamppost outside, guitar case at his feet. Feel like getting some air, he asked. Wandered through quiet streets lined with blooming dogwoods, the air damp and cool. Evan told me about growing up in a small town in Idaho, about hitchhiking to Portland when he was 19 with nothing but his guitar and 2 changes of clothes. He didn't talk about family, and I didn't press. At one point, we stopped on a bridge overlooking the Willamette River. The city lights rippled on the water. I used to think I'd leave, he said, resting his arms on the railing. Go somewhere bigger. But then I realized, sometimes the place doesn't matter as much as the people you find there. I glanced at him, wondering if he meant me. He didn't say, and I didn't ask. By June, Portland was starting to feel less like a place I'd landed in by accident and more like somewhere I could belong. Not because the city had changed, but because I wasn't moving through it alone anymore. Jules and I became the kind of friends who shared clothes and secrets. She had a sharp wit that could cut and a soft heart she tried to hide. She also had a string of bad exes, each one worse than the last, and a habit of falling for people she swore she'd never date. Evan was different. We weren't dating, not exactly. We hadn't even kissed. But there was something in the way he looked at me sometimes, like he was waiting for the right moment, and yet, there was always a part of him I couldn't quite reach. One night, after his set at the Anchor, I found him sitting outside on the curb, staring at the wet pavement. You okay? I asked. He nodded, but didn't meet my eyes. Just tired. Something in his voice told me it wasn't the kind of tired sleep could fix. I sat beside him, the rain misting against my cheeks. We didn't talk much after that, but he stayed close, his shoulder brushing mine. It was enough. Looking back, I think that was the first time I noticed the cracks. Not enough to scare me, not yet, but enough to make me wonder what he wasn't saying. By mid-July, Portland had settled into its usual rhythm: warm mornings, sudden showers in the afternoon, and evenings that smelled faintly of wet asphalt and jasmine from the planters along Hawthorne. I liked it. I liked the quiet hum of my routine, the predictability of my life at the Hollow Bean, the ease of walking down streets I'd memorized step by step, and yet, the more comfortable I became, the more I noticed the cracks in the world around me. Not the city itself, it was beautiful in its uneven, patchy way, but in Evan, he had become part of my life almost effortlessly, as if the universe had placed him there in just the right way. He came by the shop most mornings, sometimes late for his set at the Anchor, sometimes carrying groceries he bought for himself, or occasionally, for me. We laughed at dumb things, shared music, and lingered on street corners just to keep talking, but he had a weight I couldn't lift. He carried it quietly, tucked behind his smiles, in the way he sometimes stared off into nothing for minutes at a time. Noticed it most when we went to Forest Park one Saturday morning. The city was still damp from an overnight rain, and the trail was slick with mud. I wore my worn sneakers, feeling out of place next to Evan's rugged boots. I used to run these trails when I needed space, he said softly, glancing at me. Sometimes I still do. Space from what? I asked, brushing a lock of hair from my face. He shook his head, a half-smile forming. Things I can't talk about. I didn't push. Somehow, I knew it wasn't my place to pry yet. But I also felt the subtle pull, the sense that part of him was holding back, keeping something hidden that might change everything. That evening, I found myself at the Rusty Anchor again, alone this time. Jules had a last-minute gig with her band, and I didn't want to stay home staring at my tiny apartment walls. The anchor smelled of beer, old wood, and the faint tang of fried food. I slid onto a stool near the stage, nursing a cider, and watched as performers took turns exposing their souls to strangers. Evan appeared an hour later, guitar in hand, his presence like a quiet magnet. He played a few songs, including one I hadn't heard before, a slow, haunting melody that seemed to pulse with everything he didn't say. I felt my chest tighten with the familiar mix of awe and something heavier, something unspoken. After the set, he came to sit beside me. "You like it?" "It was beautiful," I said, and I meant it. He shrugged. "It's nothing. Just some memories." And there it was, the first real hint that his past wasn't as simple as the calm exterior he presented. Days turned into weeks. Evan and I spent more time together, though the exact nature of together remained undefined. We walked the city streets, went to second-hand bookstores, and shared late-night conversations on my apartment balcony. I began to care for him more than I'd anticipated, more than I had planned, but the cracks were widening. He would sometimes vanish for days without explanation. He answered calls slowly, texts even slower. When I asked if everything was okay, he would smile faintly and nod, or mutter something about needing time alone. It was confusing, frustrating, but I didn't leave. Not yet. Not when I felt, in some deep part of me, that he needed me as much as I needed him. Then came the night that changed everything. Had stayed late at the coffee shop, wiping down counters and counting cash, when my phone buzzed. It was Evan. Just his name on the screen, no message. My stomach clenched. I headed to the anchor, my sneakers scuffing the wet pavement. The bar was dim, only a few regulars lingering, and I saw him immediately. He was sitting in the corner, hands buried in his lap, eyes fixed on the floor. The guitar case leaned against his chair like a loyal companion. "Evan," I said softly. He looked up, and for the first time, the walls around him seemed to crumble. His eyes were red, tired, haunted. "Lena." He couldn't finish. I sat beside him, heart pounding. "I don't know if I can do this," he whispered. "Not right now. I want to, but there's too much that I haven't dealt with. I'm scared I'll ruin it." "You deserve better than what?" I asked, gripping his hand. He shook his head. "Then me. I'm not ready to. I'm not ready to be honest with someone. Not yet. I have baggage. A lot of it." It hit me like a wave, the depth of the secret he'd been holding, the reason behind the absences, the silences. I wanted to reassure him, to tell him it was okay, but I also understood for the first time that he couldn't. Not yet. That night, we didn't speak much more. I walked home with the rain misting my face, feeling the weight of something I couldn't fix. And yet, I didn't regret being there. Not completely. The following weeks were tense. Evan's distance grew, and I oscillated between frustration and worry. I tried to focus on my work, on Portland itself, on Jules, but the city felt smaller without him. Every song on the radio, every street corner, every shadow of someone walking alone reminded me of him. It was during this time that I realized something about myself. I didn't just miss him. I had become dependent on the small rhythms of our connection, the laughter, the quiet moments, the sense that maybe, in a messy city of strangers, I had found one person who understood me, and suddenly, I knew I had a choice. I could wait, let him struggle in silence, and hope he'd eventually come back. Or I could take a step forward and confront the truth, whatever it was, head on. One rainy morning, armed with nothing but determination and a soaked notebook in my backpack, I found him busking under the bridge near the waterfront. He looked up, surprised, and I ignored the butterflies in my stomach. "Evan," I said firmly. "I can't do this halfway. I can't wait for you to fix everything on your own. I want to know. All of it. The truth. I don't care if it's messy." He stared at me, silent, as the rain ran down our jackets. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay. I'll tell you." And for the first time, the walls fell away. The bridge was slick under our shoes, rain dripping from the steel beams above us. Evan's guitar leaned against the railing and used as he took a shaky breath. For the first time, I saw the exhaustion etched into his face, not just from late nights and busking, but from something far heavier. "I'm not going to sugarcoat it," he said finally, voice low. "My life, it's messy. I left Idaho because things got bad. My family, we don't exactly have a normal history. I got mixed up with people I shouldn't have. Bad choices. Some I can't take back." I nodded slowly, listening, gripping his hand like a lifeline. "I'm here, Evan. Whatever it is." He ran a hand through his damp hair. "I've done things I'm not proud of. Things that could hurt you if you knew too soon. That's why I disappear sometimes. I don't want to drag anyone into it." And just like that, the gaps between us began to close. I wasn't afraid. Not entirely. I was scared of what I might discover, yes, but I also realized that fear had never stopped me before. I wanted honesty, even if it burned. Over the next few weeks, Evan started to open up, piece by piece. He told me about growing up in a broken household, about leaving home at 19 with nothing but his guitar and determination. About the people he fell in with in Portland, some of whom were trouble he couldn't fully escape. He didn't go into every detail, but enough to understand the shadows in his life. In turn, shared my own past, the suffocating suburban house, the move across the country, the sense of always trying to fit in but never quite succeeding. We traded stories like fragile glass, careful not to shatter the other's trust, and yet, intimacy came in small, quiet moments, brushing damp hair from his forehead, laughing at his terrible coffee-making attempts, stealing fries from his plate when he wasn't looking. Our connection wasn't just about romance, it was about survival, about finding someone who could see the jagged edges and still stand there. But life, as it always does, refused to stay gentle for long. One night, Evan didn't show up at the anchor. Not that it was unusual, he disappeared sometimes, but this time, I felt a twist of panic I hadn't expected. I walked home through rain-soaked streets, calling him repeatedly, but there was no answer. The next morning, Jules cornered me at the coffee shop. "He got into some trouble," she said, frowning. "The cops picked him up downtown. Something about a fight, maybe old connections catching up." My stomach dropped. I barely heard her next words. "They said he might be in for a few days. Maybe longer." Days turned into nights of worry. I sat by my window, tracing the wet patterns on the glass, imagining Evan behind bars or worse. Every stranger on the street felt like a threat. Every knock at my door made my heart leap. When he finally came back, exhausted and pale, I didn't know whether to hug him or scream at him. "I did both." "I'm fine," he said, though I didn't believe him. "It's over now. I handled it." But I knew handling it in Evan's world never meant simple. And I realized something painful. Loving someone like him meant embracing uncertainty, danger, and the truth that life could shift in an instant. Over time, the city became a backdrop to our chaos. Portland wasn't just streets and coffee shops, it was the echo of our laughter, our arguments, our whispered confessions. My apartment, once a sanctuary, became a place of shared secrets, music, and stolen nights. Even Jules noticed. "You've changed," she said one evening as we shared a bottle of cheap wine on my balcony. "You're braver. More alive." I smiled faintly, looking out at the glimmering city. "I feel like I have to be. For him, for me." Jules shook her head, half amused, half worried. "Just don't lose yourself in the process." I knew she was right. Love had a way of consuming, of bending reality until it became difficult to remember where one person ended and the other began. But I also knew I wouldn't trade it for anything, and so, summer turned to autumn. Portland shifted from warm drizzle to crisp winds, leaves tumbling along the sidewalks in fiery reds and golds. Evan and I walked the city streets in tandem, sometimes silently, sometimes arguing, sometimes laughing until our stomachs hurt, discovered little pockets of happiness, a hidden taco stand that made the best al pastor, A record store with vinyls stacked to the ceiling, and quiet evenings at my apartment listening to old jazz records, but always, the shadow lingered, the sense that Evan's past wasn't fully behind him, that life could unravel at any moment. And I realized the true challenge wasn't surviving the storms outside, but weathering the storms we carried within ourselves. Autumn deepened, painting Portland in shades of amber and rust, but the city's beauty couldn't mask the undercurrent of tension between us. Evan had returned from whatever trouble had pulled him away, but the weight he carried seemed heavier than before. Some nights, he would sit silently on my balcony, staring at the city lights with a faraway look I couldn't reach. "I can't keep hiding things," he said one evening, his voice barely audible over the wind. "You don't have to hide from me," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. "I'm here. I want to understand." He shook his head. "It's not that simple. There are people, connections I thought I left behind, and now they're catching up." I wanted to ask more, to demand clarity, but the fear in his eyes stopped me. Instead, I nodded. "Then let me help you face them. Whatever it takes." That week, trouble arrived in the form of a letter slipped under my apartment door, a typed page with no return address. The message was clear: stay away from him, or you'll regret it. My heart raced as I read and reread the words. This wasn't a prank. This was real. When I confronted Evan, he didn't flinch. Instead, he looked ashamed. "I should have warned you. I wanted to. I wanted to protect you. But some things can't be kept secret forever." I grabbed his hands, gripping them tightly. "We face it together. I'm not leaving." His eyes softened, but the shadow didn't lift. "You might regret saying that." The next few days were a blur. Evan became more cautious, and I followed his lead, avoiding certain streets, certain people. But despite the fear, a strange intimacy grew between us. In the quiet moments, I realized how deeply I cared for him, not just for the romantic connection, but because he had become a part of my life I couldn't imagine losing. One rainy night, we hid in the back of the Anchor, watching as the usual crowd laughed and drank, oblivious to the tension surrounding us. Evan whispered, "I don't know if I deserve this life, Lena. You're too good for it." "Stop," I said, gripping his arm. "You're not defined by your past mistakes. We make choices every day. And right now, I choose you." He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he held me close, letting the city rain wash over us, as if in that moment, nothing else mattered. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. A week later, Evan disappeared again, this time without explanation, leaving me in a state of panic I hadn't felt before. Calls went unanswered, texts unread. My mind spiraled with worst-case scenarios. When he finally returned, it was with a story I wasn't entirely ready to hear: a confrontation with people from his past, a debt owed, and a choice he had made to protect me. Even if it meant putting himself in danger, I wanted to be angry, to demand answers, but the raw honesty in his eyes left me speechless. All I could do was hold him, feeling the fragile thread of trust between us stretch, but not break. That night, lying in my small apartment, I realized something profound. Love wasn't just about shared laughter or quiet moments. It was about standing together in the storms, about facing fear and uncertainty, and sometimes, about forgiving before fully understanding. Evan fell asleep next to me, his breathing uneven from the week's tension, and I traced the lines of his face, memorizing him as if I could protect him from the world by sheer will. Autumn slipped into early winter. Portland's streets glistened with frost, and the city lights reflected off puddles in a surreal, fragmented glow. Our relationship deepened, not without challenges, but with a newfound resilience. We faced Evan's past together, navigated the complexities of trust and fear, and discovered the fragile beauty of a bond forged in adversity. For the first time since I arrived in Portland, I felt a sense of home, not a place, but a person, a connection that grounded me. And in that, I realized that life, messy and unpredictable as it was, could also be beautiful if you were brave enough to embrace it. By December, Portland had transformed. Rain turned to frost, streets shimmered with icy glaze, and the scent of roasted chestnuts and wood smoke filled the air. The city looked magical in its winter cloak, but the magic didn't always reach us. Evan and I had settled into a rhythm, but the weight of his past still lingered like a shadow we couldn't quite shake. Some nights, he would disappear for hours, sometimes entire days, leaving me pacing my apartment, staring at the window as snow began to fall. "I can't keep vanishing," he admitted one night as we sat on the balcony, a thin blanket draped over our shoulders. The city lights reflected in the frost on the railing. "But there are people who won't let me just live. They make mistakes impossible to forget." I reached for his hand. "Then let me carry the weight with you. Don't face it alone." He looked at me, his eyes a mix of gratitude and fear. "I don't want to pull you into this, but I can't let you go either." Winter's cold forced us inside more often. Our apartment, once a small refuge, became the stage for long nights of conversation, laughter, and occasional arguments. I learned more about Evan's past, the mistakes he'd made, the choices that had shaped him, the people he still feared. It was heavy, but I also began to see the man behind the shadows, the one who loved music with a fierce intensity, who noticed the smallest details about people, who could make me laugh even when my heart felt raw. Jules noticed too. One night, as we sipped hot chocolate in my apartment, she shook her head. "You've changed, Lena. You've grown stronger, braver. But be careful, you can't save him from everything." "I know," I said softly. "But I can stand with him. That's all I can do." Then came the night that tested everything. Evan's past caught up with him in a way I hadn't expected. A confrontation, a mistake, a moment of violence that left him shaken and vulnerable. I rushed to him, ignoring the snow and cold, and found him at a small park, his coat torn, hands trembling. "Lena," he whispered. "I didn't mean for you to see this." But I didn't turn away. I held him, letting the snow fall around us, letting the city's frozen streets witness our bond. In that moment, I realized love wasn't about perfection. It was about presence, about showing up even when life threatened to break you. The days that followed were tense. Evan had to deal with the fallout, and I watched him navigate it with a quiet strength I hadn't known he possessed. I felt pride, fear, love, all tangled together. Through it all, Portland became our backdrop, the frost on the bridges, the steaming coffee in our hands, the late-night walks through streets lit by holiday lights. Life was chaotic, uncertain, sometimes terrifying, but it was ours, and in the quiet moments, I found home not in a place, but in a person who had become my world. Winter had settled firmly over Portland, turning the city into a mosaic of frost and streetlights. Snow fell intermittently, dusting rooftops and sidewalks, forcing the city into a slower, quieter rhythm. For Evan and me, the season brought reflection, tension, and, ultimately, decisions that could define our future. He had grown more withdrawn over the past weeks. Despite the bond we shared, I could see the struggle behind his eyes, the conflict between the man he wanted to be and the past that clung to him like a shadow. I knew the time had come for truth, no matter how much it scared me. One evening, after a long shift at the coffee shop, I found him sitting alone on the balcony, a faint frost covering the railing. His guitar rested against the wall, untouched. "I can't keep doing this," he said, voice tight, eyes fixed on the city below. "I can't keep running, hiding, pretending everything is okay when it isn't. I've hurt people. I've hurt you. You've never hurt me intentionally," I said, stepping closer. "And I won't let fear dictate how we live. But you need to let me in. All of me wants to help, Evan. Don't shut me out." He looked at me, a mixture of longing and terror in his gaze. "I don't know if I can promise a perfect life. I can only promise honesty, and that I'll try every day to be better, to be here." I nodded, understanding the weight of what he was offering. It wasn't simple, it wasn't clean, but it was real. And in Portland, in that small apartment with frost on the balcony, it felt like enough. Over the next few weeks, we navigated a delicate balance. Evan began confronting his past, reaching out to the people he'd wronged, facing situations he had avoided for years. I was there every step, sometimes silently, sometimes pushing when he needed encouragement. It was exhausting, painful, but transformative. At the same time, I faced my own reflection. I had built a life from scratch, found a place in the city, and forged a connection with someone who was anything but ordinary. I realized strength wasn't about avoiding fear, it was about embracing it, moving forward despite uncertainty, and making choices that defined who I wanted to be. The emotional climax came unexpectedly one night. Evan received a call that demanded an immediate, unavoidable confrontation with someone from his past, someone dangerous, someone who threatened to undo all the progress he had made. I followed him, not out of bravado, but because I couldn't stay behind. We faced the confrontation together. There were tense words, moments of fear, and a final decision that required both of us to trust each other completely. When it was over, standing on a quiet street in the snow, Evan turned to me. "I couldn't have done this without you," he admitted, exhaustion and relief mingling in his voice. "You're everything I didn't think I deserved." I smiled, despite the cold intention. "You deserve someone willing to stand by you. And I'm not going anywhere." Winter faded slowly into early spring. Portland bloomed again, streets glimmering with rain-soaked sunlight and the scent of cherry blossoms. Our relationship, tempered by trials and revelations, had grown stronger, anchored in trust, honesty, and the unspoken understanding that life would never be perfect, but we could face it together. Realized that home wasn't a place. It was a person, a connection that grounded you, made you brave, and made the chaos of life feel navigable. And in Evan, I had found that home. Spring arrived in Portland quietly, the kind of warmth that seeped slowly into your bones. The frost had melted, the streets glistened with rain-soaked sunlight, and the city smelled like wet earth and blooming flowers. After months of tension, fear, and uncertainty, the world felt alive again, but differently. Evan and I walked the streets together one afternoon, our hands intertwined. The rhythm of the city mirrored the rhythm of our lives, unpredictable, sometimes messy, but full of possibility. We had survived storms, both external and internal, and emerged stronger, more connected, and more aware of what truly mattered. Our routine settled into a comforting pattern. Mornings were for coffee at the Hollow Bean, where Jules teased us relentlessly about our obsessive couple energy. Afternoons were spent wandering the city, discovering little corners and hidden bookstores, sharing quiet conversations and music. Nights were for the apartment balcony, sipping wine, watching the city lights reflect on puddles, and talking about dreams we hadn't dared to say aloud before. The challenges weren't gone. Evan still carried the weight of his past, and I still faced moments of doubt. But together, we learned to navigate the uncertainties, to communicate, and to trust. One evening, we sat by the Willamette River, the water calm and reflective. Evan played a soft melody on his guitar, one he had written during the dark winter months. I listened, letting the music wash over me, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the city, for our journey, for him. "You know," I said softly, leaning my head on his shoulder, "I never thought I'd find home here." He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Home isn't a place," he said. "It's the people who stay with you, even when things get hard." I nodded, feeling the truth of his words in every fiber of my being. Home was this, us together, in a city that had once been foreign but had become ours through love, struggle, and resilience. As spring deepened, I realized that life wouldn't always be easy. There would be storms, heartbreaks, and moments that tested our limits. But I also knew that love, when rooted in honesty and shared strength, could weather anything. Portland, with its streets glistening in rain and its quiet corners filled with stories, had given me more than a new city. It had given me connection, courage, and the certainty that I could face the world with someone by my side. And in Evan, I had found not just a partner, but a home. The city breathed around us, alive and unpredictable, much like life itself. But for the first time, I felt steady. I felt ready. And I knew, no matter what storms came next, we would face them together. Lena moved to Portland with little more than a suitcase, her laptop, and a fragile sense of hope. The city was unfamiliar, rainy, and alive with strangers she might never meet, but she was determined to start over. She found a tiny apartment above a thrift store, a place that smelled faintly of dust and forgotten memories. Each morning, she walked the wet streets, drinking in the rhythm of a city that had yet to teach her its secrets. Her first weeks blurred into work at the Hollow Bean, a small coffee shop where the baristas knew everyone's order before they spoke. Lena struggled at first, burning the milk on the steam wand, spilling coffee, getting the names wrong, but slowly, she began to fit. Among the customers, she noticed a pattern: musicians who passed through, writers scribbling furiously in notebooks, the lonely who lingered over tea. And one of them, Evan, became impossible to ignore. Evan first appeared at an open mic at the Rusty Anchor, his guitar case in hand, his voice calm and mesmerizing. Lena was captivated, not just by the music but by the way he seemed present yet distant at the same time. Over the following weeks, they ran into each other at the coffee shop, on street corners, at bookstores. Conversations were easy at first, then more intimate, but always tinged with unspoken tension. Evan's past hinted at shadows, sudden disappearances, vague references to difficult circumstances, and an underlying sadness that Lena couldn't fully understand. Despite this, she felt herself drawn to him, her curiosity mingling with a growing affection that she wasn't ready to name. As summer arrived, Lena began noticing the deeper fractures in Evan's life. He sometimes vanished for days, returned with a faint haze of exhaustion and avoidance. The revelation came one night on a rainy street corner. He admitted he was scared, that his past included mistakes and people he couldn't escape, and that he didn't want to drag her into his chaos. Lena's response was quiet strength. She promised to stay, to face the shadows with him, even if it meant discomfort, fear, or heartbreak. This period of tension deepened their connection. They shared secrets, small joys, stolen fries, late-night walks, and music that bound them. Portland itself became a character in their story. Bookstores, bridges, streetlights, and cafes were witnesses to their growing bond. Evan began to open up about his past, a broken family, bad choices, and dangerous acquaintances he had tried to leave behind. Lena shared her own struggles, creating a fragile but growing trust. Life's challenges increased when Evan got caught in a confrontation that left him shaken, reminding them both of the precariousness of their existence. The story explored realistic life moments, navigating fear, learning to forgive, and accepting each other's imperfections. Lena realized that love was more than passion. It was a commitment to stand together when life became unpredictable. Autumn brought vivid colors and a deeper sense of urgency. Threats from Evan's past arrived in the form of anonymous letters and warnings, testing Lena's loyalty. She decided to face the danger with him, solidifying their bond. Their relationship became a careful balance between trust and fear, courage and vulnerability. The narrative detailed day-to-day life as well: coffee runs, shared music, quiet city walks, and the constant tension of loving someone whose past could upend everything. Lena grew stronger, learning that love required both patience and bravery. Winter transformed Portland. Frosted streets, snow-covered rooftops, and chilly winds mirrored the emotional tension in their lives. Evan faced the final remnants of his past, and Lena confronted her own fears about commitment and vulnerability. Realistic life details were emphasized: late-night conversations over tea, heated arguments and reconciliations, silent comfort during storms, and small domestic joys. Lena and Evan discovered that survival, together, was itself a kind of intimacy. As the city entered deep winter, Evan faced a dangerous confrontation that required immediate action. Lena stood by him, fully present despite fear. This sequence heightened suspense while maintaining realism, exploring trust, courage, and resilience. They navigated the aftermath, rebuilding routines and reflecting on what they had learned about love, loyalty, and personal growth. Portland's streets glimmered with ice and holiday lights, underscoring the contrast between life's chaos and the comfort they found in each other. Spring returned, softening the city. Lena realized home was not a place but a person, someone who could weather storms with you. Evan and Lena's bond became fully established, tempered by conflict, strengthened by resilience, and enriched by trust and honesty. The story ended on a reflective note: they had grown individually and as a couple. Portland, once intimidating and unfamiliar, had become a backdrop for love, survival, and the small, meaningful details of everyday life, a life they would continue to build together. Spring in Portland carried a sense of quiet renewal. Cherry blossoms lined the streets, petals drifting lazily in the wind, and the city's usual drizzle felt lighter, almost hopeful. Lena felt it in her bones. Life was beginning again, and so was she. Evan had returned to a steadier rhythm. His past troubles weren't erased, they never would be, but the way he held himself, the way he looked at her, reflected someone ready to build rather than run. One Saturday morning, Lena and Evan walked through the Pearl District, the streets buzzing with weekend energy. Artists displayed their work, small cafes offered cinnamon-scented pastries, and children chased bubbles near the fountains. Lena's hand found Evan's, and she squeezed it. "I could get used to this," she said, smiling. "Me too," he replied softly. "Even with all the mess around us, it feels real." Life settled into routines. Mornings were for coffee and quiet reflections, afternoons for errands, music, and wandering streets, evenings for cooking together in the small apartment, sharing stories about their childhoods, dreams, and fears. Lena discovered new depths to her independence. She enrolled in a photography workshop, exploring the city through her lens, capturing the light in puddles, reflections in shop windows, the fleeting smiles of strangers. Evan often joined her, guitar in hand, turning the city into a personal concert stage, playing for her in quiet corners, but the past, even softened, never fully disappears. One evening, a message arrived on Evan's phone, a reminder that not all debts had been settled. Lena noticed the tension creeping back into his posture. "We'll face it," she said quietly, resting her hand on his arm. "Together." He nodded, gratitude and relief mixing with the shadow of worry. "Always together," he promised. In these months, Lena's perspective shifted. She realized love wasn't just the thrilling moments or dramatic gestures, it was showing up every day, staying when it was easier to leave, and finding joy in the small, ordinary experiences. Portland, with its rainy streets, quirky bookstores, and quiet parks, became a living canvas for their story, a city full of life, struggle, and beauty. Late spring in Portland brought long, lingering evenings. The city hummed with life, streetlights reflecting in wet pavement from the afternoon drizzle, and the scent of blooming jasmine drifting through the air. Lena felt a restless energy building inside her, a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Evan had started spending more time on his music, rehearsing at small venues, meeting other musicians, and slowly stepping into a life he had avoided for years. Lena admired him, but she also felt the pull of her own dreams and ambitions. She wanted more than the apartment above the thrift store, more than the familiar streets. They both did. One evening, they sat on the balcony, watching traffic lights blink through the mist. "I've been thinking," Lena began hesitantly. "Maybe it's time I try something bigger. A photography exhibition, maybe. Something that stretches me." Evan turned to her, eyes wide with interest. "That's amazing, Lena. I want that for you. I want you to grow, even if it means taking risks." She smiled, feeling the warmth of his support, but also the weight of truth. Their paths were intertwining, yet their futures weren't guaranteed. The following weeks brought a series of small challenges, Lena submitting her first professional photos to a gallery, Evan juggling gigs and rehearsals while navigating past threats that occasionally resurfaced. Every evening, they returned to the apartment, tired, sometimes frustrated, but always finding solace in each other. One rainy night, Lena caught Evan staring at her with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. "You're incredible," he said softly, voice almost breaking. "I don't tell you enough, but you've changed my world." "I could say the same," she whispered. "You make me feel safe even when the world isn't." They embraced, the city rain drumming softly on the balcony above, and Lena realized that love was not about perfection, it was about connection, honesty, and being willing to face uncertainty together. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. A letter arrived for Lena, an opportunity she had applied for months ago, but the acceptance came with the requirement to move to another city temporarily. She hesitated, torn between ambition and the life she had built with Evan. That night, they talked for hours, the city quiet around them. "I don't want to hold you back," Evan said finally. "But I also don't want to lose you." "I know," Lena replied, tears brimming. "I don't want to leave either, but maybe we can find a way to make it work." Together. He took her hands in his. Then we'll find a way. Always. Portland, with its streets glowing in the soft spring light and cafes alive with laughter, became the backdrop for their evolving dreams. Lena realized that love wasn't about avoiding hard choices, it was about navigating them with trust, courage, and a partner who believed in you even when life demanded sacrifices. Summer arrived in Portland slowly, warming the streets and filling the air with the scent of jasmine and freshly cut grass. The city was alive with festivals, street musicians, and the hum of life resuming after the rainy spring. Lena and Evan had grown into a rhythm that felt both comforting and exhilarating, two lives intertwined yet individually vibrant. Lena's photography exhibition was set to open in a small gallery downtown. She had spent months capturing Portland's hidden corners, the reflections in puddles, the quiet graffiti alleys, the golden light that fell on bridges at sunset. Each photo told a story, and each story was a reflection of the life she had built here, including the love that had shaped her journey. Evan had his own projects too. He was performing at local cafes, writing songs inspired by both the city and their shared experiences. Music had always been his refuge, but now it was also a way to celebrate growth, connection, and healing. The night of Lena's exhibition arrived. The gallery was small but warm, filled with friends, strangers, and supportive neighbors. Lena's heart raced as she walked among her photos, hearing laughter, quiet admiration, and seeing people pause thoughtfully in front of her favorite shots. Evan stood beside her, a quiet anchor. "You did it," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, squeezing his hand. "You kept me steady." They shared a moment of quiet intimacy amid the soft chatter of the gallery, the city lights outside reflecting in the windows. Lena realized that success wasn't just about recognition, it was about resilience, courage, and the people who had stood by her through the storms. After the exhibition, they walked through the streets of Portland, hand in hand. The city had changed for them, it was no longer a foreign place of uncertainty, but a living canvas for their lives, filled with memories, growth, and hope. They talked about the future, potential trips, music projects, photography collaborations, and perhaps even a move together to a bigger city temporarily for Lena's career. There were challenges ahead, but they approached them as a team, strengthened by the struggles they had already overcome. One evening, sitting on their apartment balcony with coffee in hand, Lena rested her head on Evan's shoulder. "I never thought I'd find home in a city like this," she said. Evan smiled, brushing her hair gently. "Home isn't a place," he replied. "It's the person who stays with you, through the rain, the storms, and the quiet nights." Lena closed her eyes, letting the moment sink in. Portland had given her more than a city, it had given her life, love, and the knowledge that she could face whatever came next. And in Evan, she had found her home. The city breathed around them, alive and unpredictable, much like life itself. But for the first time, Lena felt steady. She felt ready. And she knew that, together, they could face anything. Summer in Portland wasn't just about festivals and galleries, it was about the quiet, small moments that made life feel alive. Lena discovered this in the way the sunlight filtered through the blinds in their apartment, warming Evan's guitar case as he practiced softly in the corner. "Your fingers are faster than my heart can follow," Lena teased one morning. Sipping her coffee, Evan laughed, strumming a chord slowly. "You're just trying to distract me from missing the perfect note." These small, playful exchanges became a ritual. Grocery trips turned into scavenger hunts for unusual fruits, and rainy afternoons became photo adventures, capturing the city's reflections in puddles or the golden light on wet rooftops. One particularly rainy day, Lena wandered into a tiny bookstore tucked behind a bakery. She ran her fingers along the spines of old books, inhaling the scent of paper and dust. Evan followed, balancing an umbrella in one hand and his coffee in the other. "I think this place has secrets," he said, lowering his voice. "Secrets worth discovering," Lena replied, smiling. They spent hours there, lost in books and quiet conversation, forgetting time outside. Evenings often ended on the balcony, listening to Evan play music, Lena's camera resting on her lap. She would photograph the reflections of streetlights on puddles, the shimmer of neon signs, or the quiet determination on Evan's face. These were the moments that felt most real, unpolished, intimate, and full of life. Their conversations ranged from silly hypotheticals to deep confessions. "Do you ever think about the life we might have had if we never met?" Lena asked one night. "Sometimes," Evan admitted. "But then I realize I don't want that life. I want this one, with you, messy and beautiful and unpredictable." Even as the city thrummed around them, they found their own rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, laughter mixed with frustrations, quiet nights with bursts of energy, and the constant ebb and flow of discovering who they were, together and individually. Lena realized that love wasn't just about big declarations or dramatic moments. It was about showing up every day, in small ways, and finding joy and strength in ordinary life. Late summer brought longer days and the golden haze of sunsets over the Willamette River. Portland was alive with weekend markets, food trucks, and the hum of street performers. Lena was in the midst of preparing for a new photography project, an exhibit that would take her to neighborhoods she hadn't yet explored, capturing stories of ordinary people in extraordinary moments. Evan, meanwhile, was offered an opportunity to perform at a small festival outside the city. It was exciting, but it also meant time apart for the first time in months. The thought of separation stirred a quiet anxiety in both of them. One evening, as they walked home from the cafe, Lena voiced her concern. "I know it's just a few weeks," she said, "but I don't want us to drift. I've never been good at waiting." Evan took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll make it work. We always do. Distance doesn't change what we've built." Still, that night, Lena lay awake, thinking about missed phone calls, long days apart, and the tiny ways absence can create cracks in even the strongest bonds. She knew love wasn't just passion, it was patience, trust, and the willingness to fight for each other even when it was hard. The next weeks were a test. Lena immersed herself in her photography, capturing the life of the city, children playing in fountains, the elderly feeding pigeons in the park, the way sunlight hit the rooftops of old brick buildings. Each photo was a story, a testament to observation, empathy, and her own growth. Evan sent recordings of his performances, little snippets of his music that reminded her he was thinking of her. They texted constantly, shared late-night video calls, and made plans for the nights he returned. When Evan finally came back, the reunion was quiet but profound. They met on the balcony, a familiar place that had become their sanctuary. "You stayed," Evan said, a smile in his tired eyes. "Of course," Lena replied. "I knew you would too." They embraced, the city humming around them, proof that even the challenges of life couldn't break the bond they had nurtured through trust, communication, and shared vulnerability. Lena realized that this chapter wasn't just about separation or testing limits, it was about growth. Both of them were learning that love could survive distance, opportunity, and change. They were stronger individually and together, and the city of Portland had become a living witness to their resilience, a mosaic of moments both ordinary and extraordinary. Early autumn settled over Portland, painting the city in shades of amber and rust. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood fires. Lena and Evan found themselves at a crossroads, new opportunities, career ambitions, and the challenge of balancing independence with togetherness. Lena had been offered a temporary assignment in Seattle, a month-long photography residency at a prominent gallery. It was everything she had dreamed of, but it meant leaving the comfort of Portland, leaving Evan, and stepping fully into the unknown. Sitting on the balcony one evening, she turned to him. "This could be amazing for me, Evan. But it scares me. And I don't want it to scare us apart." Evan took her hands, his gaze steady. "I don't want to hold you back. You have to do this. And we'll figure out the rest together. That's what matters." They spent the next days preparing for her temporary move. They created routines to stay connected, daily calls, shared playlists, and little photo challenges where they would capture the city from their separate perspectives. Even packing her camera and lenses became a ritual of love, each strap and lens carefully arranged, a silent promise that distance wouldn't weaken their bond. During Lena's first week in Seattle, she discovered the thrill and anxiety of being on her own in a new city. The gallery staff were welcoming but busy, the streets unfamiliar, the coffee slightly different, the rhythm new. Yet, at night, she would call Evan, and his voice brought Portland back to her, steady, warm, grounding. Meanwhile, Evan threw himself into music. He performed at local venues, met new musicians, and began composing a collection inspired by Lena's photographs. Each note he played carried a whisper of her presence, a reminder of love that distance could not diminish. After the residency, Lena returned to Portland, their reunion intimate and unspoken in its intensity. They cooked together, wandered the streets, shared late-night talks, and slowly stitched their separate experiences into a shared life. "I've seen new places," Lena said one evening, "but nothing feels like home without you." "And nothing I do matters without you," Evan replied, pulling her close. As autumn deepened, they began planning their future more concretely: joint apartment renovations, photography exhibitions, music collaborations, and small trips to nearby towns to explore the Pacific Northwest. They learned to negotiate time, ambition, and desire, balancing personal growth with a shared life. Each day became a mosaic of ordinary wonders: coffee spilled and quickly forgiven, quiet laughter over silly mistakes, shared meals on the balcony, and long walks through rain-slick streets that reflected city lights in shimmering puddles. Portland had become more than a backdrop, it was a living canvas of their life together. Every street, every cafe, every bridge bore witness to growth, resilience, and the intimacy of building a future with someone who chooses you, day after day.